If you watched the last episode of Lost Locations, you already know that there was a town in the northeast jungle of MineZ back in 2012 that was so impractical that it was not only removed, but completely destroyed within a month of its addition to the map. That is the story of Johnny A, and it's the story we relived last time on this series. But we would be remiss if we didn't also discuss the location that would follow, as Johnny A's replacement would completely transform the terrain of the jungle and would contain a dungeon that became popular for solo players looking to test their skill. The Meteor Crater dungeon was a mainstay of the northeastern jungle and at one point contained what is arguably the most overpowered MineZ legendary of all time. Today, we will discuss the contents of the Meteor Crater dungeon, the changes it underwent during its time on the map, and the state of this part of the map in the present. This is the season finale of MineZ, Lost Locations. Before we get into the history of the Meteor Crater, I have to give a special thanks to Halo Wars and the MineZ team for allowing me to obtain temporary access to the old Meteor Crater build as part of the production of this video. You may have noticed already, but the Meteor Crater is a massive build, and the terrain surrounding it is even more overwhelming. Recreating this location by hand would be practically impossible, and unlike some of the past locations that were added as community submissions, there are no schematics of Meteor Crater online. Without Halo and the team allowing me to access this build, this video would never have happened, as there would have been no way to obtain original footage of this iteration of the Meteor Crater. So to Halo and the rest of the team, thank you. Now, as we discussed last time, Meteor Crater was added in the wake of Johnny A's removal. While we do know that the meteor itself was added in September of 2012 as an immediate replacement to Johnny A, we do not have enough evidence to know exactly when the dungeon component was opened and players first attempted it. There are two reasons for this. The first being that updates from this era of the game rarely came with a detailed changelog. The second reason pertains to the entrance to the dungeon itself. Since entering Meteor Crater required jumping through a literal wall of lava into a 2x1 hole, it is possible that the dungeon existed for some time prior to players discovering it. During the process of researching for this video, I reached out to Halo Wars, who was part of the group that built the Meteor Crater dungeon in the beginning, and he was able to confirm that the dungeon was not present at Meteor Crater immediately after Johnny A's removal, though we were also unable to pinpoint an exact date that that dungeon was added to the MineZ map. Nevertheless, the first videos of players attempting the Meteor Crater dungeon were uploaded in early 2013, with Matt K36 providing what is likely the earliest video to show a complete and successful run-through of the Meteor Crater dungeon. This isn't the first time we have used one of Matt K36's videos as a reference point in this series, as he has over 50 videos that show the earliest days of MineZ in extensive detail. Specifically, I know for a fact we used his videos as a point of reference in the Sacrificial Pit video. We will come back to his videos on the Meteor Crater in a little bit. As a brief caveat, the Meteor Crater likely also got some added attention due to the fact that it was one of the wiki articles that was featured on the original MineZ wiki at minezwiki.net. On the homepage of this site, there was a featured article of the day that rotated between about a dozen different article entries, and the page for Meteor Crater happened to be one of them. For many of us, this was how this dungeon first came to our attention. The layout of the Meteor Crater dungeon made for a decent challenge that could also be completed by a solo player within the span of a few minutes. To get into the dungeon, a player had to jump into the lava on the west side of the meteor at a very precise spot. From there, the player would swim through the lava and find themselves in a small water pool that would extinguish their burning and mark the beginning of the dungeon. The first room consisted of a flat, narrow hallway with lava on the ground for players to avoid through careful footing and jumps over these lava pools. There were zombie pigman spawners in this room that were meant to incentivize players to finish this room quickly. However, these spawners were generally inactive for most of the dungeon's existence, and they were rarely a factor as a result. Once this room was completed, the player would find themselves in a small dropper section, where they would gradually fall onto multiple platforms made of obsidian and glowstone blocks. At the bottom of this section there was a water pool that would break the player's fall and also serve as a water refill. Next up was the Diamond Parkour Room, a small spherical chamber with a few simple parkour jumps. However, before entering this section, there was a pressure plate that would spawn a zombie pigman when activated. Players could avoid this plate by jumping over it, but it was also easy to hit your head on the blocks above, making it tricky to get through this section without spawning the pigman. After the diamond parkour room, there was another similar tunnel with a pressure plate that spawned a pigman. The next section was the emerald parkour room, which consisted of parkour that was considerably more difficult, consisting of a few head hitter and corner jumps towards the top of the room. Finally, there was the loot room, which was a small alcove with a chest and a pressure plate to leave the dungeon. Just before this room, at the top of the emerald parkour room, there was another pressure plate that spawned zombie pigmen. Although the loot room itself was very small, it often had a lot going on. As you can see from Matt K36's video, once he gets into the loot room, if the player activated the pressure plate that was contained therein, there was the potential for a snowball effect to occur, in which multiple pigmen would spawn in that confined space. Fortunately, this could be managed at the time of Matt's video, as pigmen spawn baby zombies like they do in the present. However, in the era of the game where adult pigmen would spawn 4 baby pigmen upon being hit, a snowball effect in this section would be difficult, if not impossible, to survive. This also allowed runs to be influenced somewhat by luck or RNG, as zombies could occasionally spawn naturally at the top of the emerald room near the pressure plate, setting off this snowball effect before a player even made it to the top of the parkour. This was the general layout of the Meteor Crater dungeon, with essentially no significant changes for the entirety of its existence on the map. In fact, the most significant changes this dungeon experienced generally pertain to the legendary items that it dropped. You may have noticed in the clip from Matt's video that he picked up a wooden sword from the loot room. When Meteor Crater was first added to the map, it dropped a legendary called the Simon's Deal. The Simon's Deal has always been considered one of the most, if not the most, overpowered MineZ legendaries of all time. Fortunately, Matt K36 also made a separate video, where he demonstrated the legendary at the town of Portsmouth, back when you could still PvP at spawn towns. When right-clicked, the legendary would give the player strength and speed for a considerable amount of time. Then at the end of these buff effects, the player would be struck by lightning and given some debuffs. But as you can see from Matt's point of view, the effects from this legendary were very strong, and allowed him to slay nearby leather players with just one hit of a diamond sword, when they started at full health. There are also several old clips of players using this legendary in fights at Alhassa, where they generally take down a full iron player within 2 to 3 hits with a diamond sword. Needless to say, this legendary created some very one-sided fights, and as a result, its stay on the map was relatively short. Come 2014, the Simon's Deal was removed from the game, and the Spike Thrower was added to Meteor Crater. The Spike Thrower is still obtainable today from the Eclipsed Ruins dungeon in the East Desert. And as many of you probably know, it is a much less viable legendary compared to the Simon's Deal. The Spike Thrower remained as the legendary item for Meteor Crater until the August 15th, 2015 update, where all non-elite dungeons lost their unique legendary items. Although this change would certainly make completing Meteor Crater a little less rewarding, it would also be a short-lived change to the dungeon and its balancing. The last historically significant year for the Meteor Crater dungeon prior to its removal was 2017. 2017 was actually a significant year for all MineZ dungeons that existed at the time, because the pre-Origins update was released that April, which added dungeon-specific legendaries back to the game for the first time in nearly 2 years. As part of this update, Meteor Crater received the Meteor Rain legendary, which, as the name suggests, created a rain of meteors surrounding the player upon its use. These meteors were essentially just fire charges, and if a player happened to be hit by one, they dealt about 1 heart of damage. Around this time, Meteor Crater also received its own proper loot room, so players could obtain their prizes from the dungeon, including the legendary and any dungeon chests, without fear of pigmen creating a snowball effect around them while they were looting. Additionally, Meteor Crater would be reskinned in December of 2017 as part of that year's Christmas update. This reskin would be used for the Christmas update the following year as well, in 2018. As part of this update in both of those years, the exterior was redesigned to look like part of a snowman. and some of the interior sections were reskinned with snow and ice to appear more fitting for the winter season. As luck would have it, there was one video of the winter meteor crater, and happened to be one that I uploaded way back then. And I've not been able to find any additional footage of this version of the dungeon since then. Besides these holiday reskins, Meteor Crater remained primarily unchanged until its removal with the Origins update of 2020. With this update, the old Meteor Crater was replaced by the meteor that exists on the map currently. In fact, the new meteor was also teased in the trailer for this update that was released about a week prior to it, also in May of 2020. Although Meteor Crater does exist on the map today, it is a far cry from what used to occupy that area. The new meteor is significantly smaller, with much less dramatic terrain. The content at this location is also significantly scaled down now, as the new meteor was added with one sole military chest at the top. Later on, a grenadable wall would be added that would lead to 2 additional room-type chests, but this is still a far cry from what used to occupy the area. Since then, there's been some speculation that additional content would be added to the meteor eventually, and staff have even expressed interest individually in adding a type of quest line that would involve this meteor crater in some capacity. However, for now that is not the case, and the content in this area is limited to those room chests and the military chest on top of the meteor. Even though the meteor crater still exists as a location now, the dungeon content that used to characterize the Meteor Crater location is now long gone, and so we remember it as a lost location. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. This marks the end of Season 1 of Lost Locations. I've had a lot of fun reliving these locations from MineZ Past over the past several months, and the fact that so many of you joined in and shared your own memories of these locations is honestly the coolest thing to me. Rest assured, there will definitely be more Lost Locations content at some point in the future, as there are definitely more stories to tell of MineZ locations that have come and gone in over 10 years of the game's existence. And more locations will surely come and go in the future with future updates, and I look forward to telling those stories as well. In the meantime, I've also been working on a new series that will combine some of the history of MineZ with some more current content, and I really look forward to sharing that with you all as well. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.